What do you make of everything that's been going on in Los Angeles right now related to the immigration enforcement operations and the raids that have followed?
Well, I think it's unfortunate. We allow protests in this country and assembly, but they got to be peaceful. And unfortunately, we're seeing rocks being thrown and cars being set on fire, and President has brought in ICE has come in to arrest a lot of these illegal criminal let's see, illegal, I guess. Well, okay. President Trump has been focusing on people who are here illegally and are criminals. And unfortunately, he had to bring in the National Guard to try to protect our folks. And this is really the consequence of, when we have millions of people coming across our border unvetted. We should have been vetting those folks. And unfortunately, we're having to vet them while they're here and then trying to remove the criminal element. And unfortunately, some people aren't happy with that.
How would you describe the state of Southern California right now with all these raids? I mean, just even with Los Angeles, it's unrecognizable from my perspective. How would you describe it?
Well, it's chaos. I mean, even people are shutting down the freeways, and that's chaos. And this is what happens, when leaders they choose politics over keeping, law and order. I mean, that's government's number one job is to keep everyone safe. And unfortunately, this has gotten out of hand, and the president has had to bring in the National Guard to hopefully, keep everyone safe. But unfortunately, this is it's like what we had in the 2020 riots here in San Diego County. We had police stations burned down. We had banks being burned down in La Mesa, and unfortunately got out of hand. And so job number one for governments to keep people safe. And unfortunately, this has got turned into chaos primarily because of politics.
Why? Okay, leads into my next question. Why do you think the response has escalated to this level?
Well, I think it's the presence of ICE agents, but as I said earlier, this is a consequence of letting millions of people across our border without being properly vetted, and so people think, well, they're here, they should be allowed. But I do think we need to focus on and get the criminal element out of our country, and I think people on both sides of the aisle. This is kind of common sense. Is if you're here illegally and you've committed crimes, and many people on both sides of the aisle for the last few decades have agreed if you're here illegally and you are committing crimes, you should be deported.
Mhm. What happened to the administration promising to only go after murderers and pedophiles and gang members, though? Because that evidently is not
That's
the
still
case.
my understanding is that's still the focus. That is still the focus to go after people who have committed felonies or, higher end type of crimes. I mean, we just had a Venezuelan gang member arrested here locally in San Diego County. So I believe that the focus is still, but if there's other people involved or people pushing back or people harboring these criminals, then they could get tied up into the, deportations. But the primary focus is on the criminals of the higher end crime and going after them primarily is what my understanding of what the federal government's trying to accomplish.
Mhm. Yeah, it might be the priority. Obviously, not the only people they're going after, as we saw with Buena Forqueta, is getting 19 people or targeting 19 people whose worst crime is using a fake green card. Is that really making our streets safer?
Well, if we got people acting illegal that are here illegally and then they're using fake ID cards or things like that, I don't know. There's probably more to that than meets the eye. The full investigation hasn't come out, but where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? I guess as far as criminal activity and potentially the restaurant was under. I've heard also was underpaying these folks, and it was kind of a more than just using fake ID cards, which people shouldn't be doing that. If you're here illegally and you're committing crimes, you shouldn't be in our country.
Does any part of you empathize with the frustration from these protesters?
Not when you're throwing rocks and you're potentially hurting or causing harm to people in your protests. You should not be doing that, and that's where I think the line should be drawn. Peaceful protests are fine, and there's other means of trying to get your point across or ideas across. if you don't like what the government's doing at any level. But when you go to violence and burning of police cars or throwing rocks at police cars and law enforcement, then the line you've crossed the line too far.
What kind of message do you think these protests are sending? And then on the flip side, what kind of message do you think the Trump administration is responding with?
Well, I think the Trump administration is responding with, we got to keep law and order. I mean, laws are essential. Politics, unfortunately, get in the way, but we have to keep everybody safe. So what was the first part of your question?
What kind of message do you think the protests are sending? And how do
The protests are saying don't deport anybody. Don't go after criminals. Don't try to deport people who are here illegally and have criminal activity. I mean, I think that's the message, and I don't think that resonates with most Americans. I think if you've crossed the border and you're here illegally, and you're working, you should probably be left alone. But if you're going to be causing criminal activity, then that's a whole different reason, I guess, for deportations. And I think that's legitimate. And people, I think a lot of people on both sides of the aisle understand that.
As we now know, Trump has authorized 2,000 National Guard troops to deploy to Los Angeles amid all these protests. Governor Gavin Newsom has called the move purposefully inflammatory. Democratic governors across the country have called it an alarming abuse of power. You call it what?
Necessary actions to keep the peace.
Do you think the administration could be doing anything differently to prevent these immigration raids from turning into such a spectacle?
Well, one of the things, unfortunately for California, we've declared ourselves a sanctuary state to where local law enforcement can't enforce immigration laws. So we've kind of put this upon ourselves, where we're in a situation where we've got people here unvetted that are potentially committing high level crimes, and we need to deal with it. I mean, we have to have law enforcement's essential, and keeping people safe is essential. It's hard for me to say this is way too far, but the state of California, I don't think it's been safe. Gavin Newsom, I understand, said, well, hey, let us take care of it. Well, if you look at what's going on in LA, the police are being overrun and need help, and we need to have law and order and to keep the peace, to keep everyone safe.
Is there anything you disagree with?
I disagree with the folks protesting, I think, and being violent. I guess that's where they can protest all they want, but
what about from the administration side, I guess?
I think they're doing what they need to do to keep us all safe, deporting criminals, and then keeping the people that are doing that job safe as well. So I don't really have a criticism of the administration. They're doing their job and they're keeping us safe. I think the state of California, I don't think I think the LA police are overburdened or being overrun. And so the National Guard's got sort of a natural next step.
How do you see this improving down the line? If people are going to remain this publicly emotionally frustrated with what is unfolding?
Well, I think if in California, if we allowed our local law enforcement to enforce immigration law, we wouldn't have to have these types of higher end raids from the federal government coming in. We could be able to take care of that ourselves. But with SB 54 in the state of California, it doesn't allow local law enforcement to enforce immigration laws. And if that's the case, then federal government, it's their job to enforce immigration laws, and it's left entirely upon them. And then this is kind of the outcome you get.
Anything else you think we missed?
No, I think it's pretty good.